We have a new guest in the studio. Before we welcome and introduce him, CT using the Samsung Galaxy Tab S8 Ultra has the day's proverb.
Yes. When mosquitoes work, they bite, then they sing.
When mosquitoes work, they bite,
And then they sing.
then they sing. This is a proverb from Mali.
This is a proverb from Mali.
It's an interesting one, isn't it?
It's actually very interesting when you think about it. It's giving a human presence and animating a mosquito.
Yeah.
So that is a human being. It's singing. The biting bit, yes. It doesn't actually bite you really. It pricks you. Yes. But for purposes of understanding it from a human perspective, we will say it bites you.
Moumanambu. Medonwanombu. SULEIMAN SHAHBAL, investment banker, businessman, politician, is our guest this hour. Good morning.
Good morning, Eric. You know, every time I come here, Charles always starts off with a very philosophical note. Today he's talking about mosquitoes, and but I think for the young viewers out there, let me also start with a Nigerian proverb.
Oh, wow.
Okay, which Chinua Achebe used to be very fond of saying. He says, the man who looks at a beautiful girl and doesn't talk to her will end up serving lunch at her wedding. I think you've had that, Charles.
Woman doesn't talk to her. We'll end up serving lunch at her wedding.
Yes.
He will not be denied looking, but that's all he'll be doing.
That's all.
It will be too late by
He'll
then.
just be looking.
She'll be married to somebody else, and all he'll do is serve lunch. SHAHBAL, karibu sana.
Asante sana.
The last time you're here, it was at the height of the campaigns.
Correct.
You are one of the leaders in Azimio, those who are on the front line campaigning for the Azimio ticket.
Yes.
Of course, it went the way it went. We have a new government in place. Azimio is in the minority in the National Assembly and in the Senate. And now we're looking into going forward. So far, 7 weeks or so into this administration, are we on track?
I think it would be too early to start judging now. It's only, this is the first 90 days. It's the honeymoon period. I've seen a number of things that are actually quite encouraging. I'm seeing some very decisive moves on a few issues. And what's important is the election's over. Okay. We have a new president. We have a new administration. We have to move on and make the best of it. So let's not talk about the campaign and all that. That's now history. What's important is that we have enormous economic challenges ahead of us, and it's time for bipartisan cooperation to move this country forward. That's what matters right now.
What are these encouraging, decisive moves that you've seen?
I'm involved in the affordable housing sector, which I personally believe is extremely critical goal to move our people into the middle income segment. And in the last administration, we had a lot of promises. We were long on promises and short on delivery. So a lot of these affordable housing projects were taking too long. For example, on the issue of title deeds. Developers can't move forward if there is indecisiveness on the title deed. On the issue of VAT exemptions, for example, the government had issued VAT exemptions. On a number of things like that were taking forever. This administration, or more specifically the president, has moved very decisively to make this happen. Now, if he brings the same decisiveness in other critical issues, then I think we're in for a more effective government.
Okay.
So I'm an optimist. I always want to look at the positive sides of life, and let's hope that the other good things that we are expecting will happen.
The current talk in Parliament is with regards to nominations to the East African Legislative Assembly. 9 slots available for Kenya. Various political parties are nominating their people to be voted for by members of Parliament. You've been nominated by your party, ODM. among others, who are under the Azimio coalition. There are those who have also been nominated by Kenya Kwanza. And there are very many people who are seeking just these 9 slots. Take us through, because now you understand this thing. What is the process of actually getting somebody to go and represent us in Arusha?
I think let's start with the process. The Kenya Kwanza coalition has 5 seats. And the Azimio brigade has 4. So on both sides of the divide, you find that I think more than 500 people applied for these 15 positions. So the parties had to sift through all these applications and zero down on who they felt was best qualified to represent the country. And at the same time, they had to strike a regional balance. So you'll find that Azimio has nominated people from across the country. Same thing with Kenya Kwanza. And what will happen next is that Parliament will vote. They'll vote for the Azimio candidates, and they will vote for the Kenya Kwanza candidates. And may the best man or woman win.
When we say Parliament will vote,
yes,
we mean the National Assembly.
The National Assembly and the Senate.
And the Senate.
Yes.
So all of them must vote. Now, are we saying that all members, say, of the National Assembly will vote for Azimio candidates?
No, there'll be two. No, there'll be 2 votes. One vote will be for the Azimio candidates, and they have to select 4. And then the second vote will be for the Kenya Kwanza. They have to select 5.
And all members of the House, including those in Azimio, must select the Kenya Kwanza people.
Correct.
So it has to be unanimous, a majority decision.
Majority decision.
A majority decision in the House.
Yes. Because ultimately, once you are elected, you're not there representing Azimio or Kenya Kwanza. You're there representing the people in the Republic of Kenya. Yeah.
Okay, so what we are saying is that we will not see a playing out of politics the way we've normally done here. That the end goal really is to say the face and the embodiment of the sovereignty of Kenya is what is being held at the Assembly. What work then by the legislators is actually done at the Assembly?
You mean at the East African Assembly?
At the East African Assembly.
Well, representing our national interest, because you see, the East African community, the East African Legislative Assembly brings together representatives from Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, I believe South Sudan, and now even Congo will eventually be there. And while we have a lot in common interests, we also have rivalries and differences between us. And the East African Assembly's main objective is to try and find and build common ground amongst these East African countries. And of course, once people get on a negotiating table, everybody's looking for his own interest, you know. Even in the family, you'll find the kids are negotiating for their own personal interest. So this is normal, you know.
It is, but if you look at the East African community and you look at other trading blocs even within the region, perhaps what dominates many of these discussions are the benefits that one hopes to derive, the business benefits one hopes to derive from these associations. Now, the question I'm asking myself is, are hard-boiled politicians really the right people for a position in EALA? Let me explain to you why I'm asking myself the question. Because when I say hard-boiled, I mean someone whose very breath is politics. Everything they utter is politics. And yet the issues that we're looking at here are not necessarily political. There's need to have a knowledge of what it is that an economy, now not forget the country, the economy of this particular country can benefit from, and how that can be in tandem with the other countries that are part and parcel of this bloc. Now, would you then say, Mr. SHAHBAL, that given that you're a businessman, that you would consider yourself favorable in this regard?
It didn't take long for him to put me on the ropes. Absolutely. Number one, what you said is right. The two key considerations in the East African Assembly is, number one, security issues and economic issues. But even more interesting, when you travel across this country, you discover some very interesting things. We were in Budalangi, which is in Nyanza, and the people are complaining that when they go fishing just across Western,
Yes.
Okay, that when they go fishing across, they get harassed by Ugandans. We were in Turkana, and somebody was telling us that one time President Uhuru was looking for Munyes, couldn't find him. Where was Munyes? Munyes was in Ethiopia. But where's Ethiopia? It's across the river. Okay, so they cross the river. They go across the river to go and have a beer or two. Okay. The same thing. You go to Northeastern, you find that the border is very porous. So we have a lot of common interest between our countries. But when you start saying that whether politicians are qualified to discuss economic issues, you really have a very low opinion of politicians, don't you, boss?
That's because a secret, I think.
No, because you see, politicians, once the politics is over and they go to parliament, what are the issues they discuss? It's the economic, social, and political issues of this country, and many of them, and I would say a vast majority of politicians have a good understanding of the economic issues facing this country. So I don't know why I think you need to moderate your opinion of politicians a little bit on the higher side.
It isn't me to moderate it. It's me to have evidence that would lead me to moderating it. Because I arrive at the position I'm in because I look at the responsibilities that our parliaments have and the role that is actually their mandate, solely theirs, making laws, ensuring that there's an element of oversight. And I look at some of the ills we discuss in the country. It is because these very same individuals collectively did not do what they were supposed to do. They are the ones who are poisoned. It's them. There's nobody else. But they didn't. We always have issues, for instance, with the discussion of budget. We have a budget-making parliament. After the budget has been passed, then you hear of people saying, no, we argued that the price of bread should go down. You're asking yourself, for heaven's sake. There's a much bigger issue here, and you're the people dealing with it. What on earth were you doing? Now, if it is on the issue and bread, maize meal, and then such individuals with such thinking are taken to the East African, to EALA, to be discussing cross-cutting issues about, I fear to think how they're going to make decisions that will be. I really fear to think. It is not what I think. It is what I think based on what I have seen and what I've experienced. Yes.
Let me comment to that. In the last 10 years of my involvement in politics, I have met probably 100 or so broadcasters, people like you. And out of those 100 or so, there are maybe 10, 15 of them who are completely useless. Totally useless. And you walk into a studio and within 5 minutes you realize I'm wasting my time. But you also have broadcasters who are brilliant. And I'm pleased to say this group of 3 here are part of those brilliant people. So you cannot judge a body of 400 elected members on the basis of a few incapable people and assume that the entire parliament is incapable. We have some very, very brilliant and well-informed people there. So let's focus on the good rather than on the negative.
The thing is, I don't
That's the
truth. You cannot assume 400 people elected by the people of Kenya that all of them are incompetent.
You know, what do you judge a group of people buy.
Not by the chaff.
SHAHBAL, you take on city on this one. We will be here until 1 a.m. Not even 1 p.m. 1 a.m.
But your point is well made.
Yes. So there are people,
and I concede that indeed there are very many parliamentarians who are brilliant. I concede that they have made very, very, very useful and beneficial contributions. That is also true. Mm-hmm. Yes.
The work of the East African Legislative Assembly is broad. It's looking at laws that they would make for the region that in some cases need to be domesticated in the regional parliaments, in the individual countries' parliaments, but also looking at that whole journey of integrating the East African community. Now, the conversation about integration of East African community, political federation, into economic integration and all, has been going on slowly, but we've been increasing the number of members into the EAC. Now we are 7 member countries of the EAC. Do you see that integration actually coming to fruition? Let's start with a proper 100% economic integration.
It will take time, but you see, the journey of 1,000 miles has to start with one step. We have a number of challenges that need to be addressed. You know, if you look at East African trade today, between all of us, it's below $2 billion. Okay. Our largest trading partner is Uganda, and our exports to Uganda are $920 million. Now, let me put that in perspective. Ours is $2 billion. The trade that passes through the port of Jebel Ali alone is $89 billion. What does that tell us? That our trade is almost insignificant. And for me, the biggest attraction of EALA is that we have to push our economies to become exporting economies. And our export markets are not just our East African markets. Our export markets have to be outside. We need to invigorate and start our special economic zones. And this is something I've been talking here for the last 10 years. I'm sure I've told you this until you're bored with it, but it has to be our national imperative. The Chinese economy moved out of poverty because of Shenzhen, one special economic zone. And within 10 years, they lifted China out of poverty. The same principle was applied by what we call the Asian tigers, and they changed their economies. Why aren't we doing it here? Because of our East African community push and pull and regulations that are impeding the development of these special economic zones. Now, for us in Kenya here today, I am more concerned about our unemployed youth than the sensitivities of our partners and our neighbors. So we have to push the East African community towards understanding that it is in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, Congo's interests that we start focusing on our special economic zones to drive economic agenda and to move things forward. Look at AGOA, probably one of the greatest opportunities, economic opportunities that we have ever had. The United States imports $300 billion, no, actually it's now $350 billion of clothes every single year. Kenya exports $350 million. So we're not even doing 0.01%. Why? Why aren't we taking advantage of that? Why isn't Kenya becoming a major exporting country? As long as we continue under the current trade regime, we're not going anywhere. So my first priority is to push our economic agenda. And I strongly believe that this economic agenda should be the same economic agenda that Tanzania is following, that Uganda is following, that the Congo is following. And we should stop and start moving away from these parochial, regional concerns. You know, at one time we're blocking Ugandan milk from coming into Kenya. Uganda is blocking our chickens from going into Uganda. I mean, what sort of nonsense is this? You know, we need to look at the bigger picture and move on. Now, if I can get a platform to do that, that will make me very happy.
How do you balance that between that, looking at how to trade as a bloc, Kenya's interests, where our neighbors, our partners in the East African community have sort of been feeling rather unhappy when Kenya goes ahead and starts conversations with America to sign trade agreements with America, when Kenya is signing trade agreements with the United Kingdom, and then that has an impact on the East African community. How would you balance that if you are in the assembly?
That's why it's important to sit at a regional platform and recognize that our $2 billion of trade between us is peanuts. Why are we focusing on the peanuts? Why are we focusing on the small issues instead of focusing on the big issues? Now, my friend, if you are not going to do serious business with me, I'll go and do it somewhere else. And I think that should be the driving agenda. We need to push the East African community to be more aggressive and more internationally focused, rather than continuing with our regional trade restrictions.
Let's take a break. 29 minutes after 8. SULEIMAN SHAHBAL is a businessman, politician. He is ODM's nominee for position of East Africa Legislative Assembly member representing Kenya. He will be voted for by members of the National Assembly and the Senate this week. Which day specifically?
Thursday.
On Thursday. All right. He's here. We are talking about the importance of Kenya having a strong representation in the East African Legislative Assembly.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
Eric Latif, Nduoko, C.T. Muga, and SULEIMAN SHAHBAL, businessman, politician, nominee for position of a member of the East African Legislative Assembly. Ndu, before you ask your question, because you know you have your question, you know SHAHBAL is also a hotelier. Tell him about the Italian Cuisine Week.
So, I mean, I know, obviously, you have a taste for these things, SHAHBAL.
For which
Fine dining.
No, I don't.
Great cuisine. Good food. Isn't it?
No, actually, I don't. You know, I'm a very simple guy.
Who says that the fine dining can't be simple? So anyway, this is what we're talking about now. We're looking at, you know, the Italian government. Every year, looking at what they do in Kenya, there's the Italian Cuisine Week. And we're right in the middle of it. Ends on the 20th. And so what they're saying is come into restaurants in different parts of the country and sample some of this great food. CT was there a couple of days ago, and he had what he wants to call ugali. It's polenta. And just experiencing culture through food, the Italian way. In Malindi, there are, what are those things called?
Tuk-tuk.
Thank you very much. That if you stop them on the way, they're giving you a sample of some of this great stuff. And walking into any restaurant in Nairobi, you have an opportunity to taste this fantastic tiramisu, which is this coffee and cream dessert. And it's celebrating Italian culture through food.
And it's something taking place throughout the world.
Are you telling me that Charles went to an Italian restaurant looking for ugali?
No. Maybe in his subconscious, he was looking for ugali, and it was presented to him with another name. That's what happened.
No, the function was at the ambassador's,
it was at the ambassador's residence.
Oh,
Yeah.
I wasn't invited, so I don't know anything
So
about
now
that.
we invite you to any restaurant in Nairobi until the 20th.
Sample tiramisu.
And you can sample tiramisu.
Yeah, your question now.
Okay. So looking at this, I mean, it's very difficult not to play regional politics against local politics when we're looking at EALA. And based on some of the things that you said, SHAHBAL, the question is, what will regional activity have in terms of local impact then when it comes to policy? Because if countries, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, let's look at Kenya, where the farmers, for example, let's just take agriculture. They've been clamoring for a reduction in the cost of agricultural inputs. If at the policy level that does not take place here, the question is, at the Legislative Assembly, on the regional level, how will something that is not happening at a domestic level take place at a regional level? And how will that happen?
Well, the problems of farmers, whether they're in Tanzania, Uganda, or Kenya, are the same. So if legislative changes are required in Kenya, probably the same legislative challenges are required in Uganda and Tanzania as well. So it's clearly a case of a need to have a regional discussion, not just a local discussion. And if we don't have that regional discussion, then you will have a situation where, let's say, duties on fertilizer will be lower in Kenya and higher in Uganda. And what will that do? It will lead to smuggling, which is completely unnecessary. So all the more reason why you need a regional platform to discuss. None of our issues in Kenya are unique to Kenya. They're regional issues.
Do you see a situation whereby the regional discussion would then force, I don't know if I should use the word force, but okay, force the hand then of individual countries to get what they need to do? Do you see that a regional discussion, an umbrella discussion, will make individual countries implement policy change?
I would want to see that in a slightly different way. If there's a discussion at a regional level, perhaps that discussion needs to be had more eloquently at a local level. So just because you are a representative in EALA doesn't mean you talk only in EALA. There may be issues raised in EALA which makes sense, in which case you come back home and you go and find the relevant minister, or if necessary the president, and tell him the Tanzanians are concerned about 1, 2, 3, which we are implementing, which doesn't make sense. Maybe we need to change. So it's a platform for creative discussions. Disagreements are natural, but the disagreement is not confrontation. We can always find common ground in a lot of the issues. And I'm an optimist. I think it's a fantastic platform that hasn't lived up to its potential.
How do you think the arrangement we have with the East African community fits into the Africa Free Trade Agreement and the discussions around it? Because the very thing you say, if it's configured correctly and it works in East Africa, then it's something that will benefit the entire continent.
Correct. I absolutely agree with that.
Yes.
Okay, and then again, that's why I'm saying we have more in common with our African neighbors than differences. What's the difference between the Kenyan economy, for example, and the Sudanese economy? The Sudanese economy, I'm talking about the northern Sudan, largely dependent on agriculture. Their problems are very similar to ours. They have problems with fertilizer inputs and all that. They have problems with food storage, just like we do. So a lot of the trade barriers that we have in Africa should actually be scrapped. Trade barriers come in when you have competing interests. But what I'm arguing is that we have more common interests than competing interests. And we should open these borders. I mean, the European economies began to flourish once the European borders were opened. The British, when they went into Brexit, are suddenly realizing that this was really a stupid move, because it started to affect their trade in a very serious way. And they're now trying to backtrack on a lot of the things that they had given up. So if we've seen it work in Europe, we've seen it work in the United States, we've seen it work with the North American trade arrangements, I think we should also follow and do the right thing.
It is strange that the East African community was not just up and running, but was successful to the point where our currencies were actually exchangeable. And then we had to backtrack and go back to the Stone Age and start all over again, because we preceded all these other economic blocks that we're talking about.
Correct. In fact, I write a column for the Standard.
Yes, you do.
And in tomorrow's column, I'm talking about exactly what you've just said, that the European Union actually came and studied the East African model. What did we do right? Unfortunately, it was the ideological conflict between Mwalimu Julius Nyerere and our President Jomo Kenyatta here. And they accused us of being man-eat-man society. And we said it's better than man-eat-nothing society. Okay. Then we went through the madness of, the Idi Amin time in Uganda. But, we have to move on.
Yes, in fact, one could argue that perhaps it's a platform from which one can glean a lot of lessons, and it can also provide a platform on which you can now build an even stronger East African community because you have lessons that you can learn from what was done previously. Now, talking about lessons, how do you think we can convince our neighbors? Because this conversation about Kenya being in a certain pole position, which some of our neighbors consider to be to their disadvantage, how do we get to convince our neighbors that this advantage we speak of may be true, but there are also huge advantages that they don't already have that they would have in getting together and working quickly to cement this particular community?
There's a Swahili saying that says, sauti nzuri humtoa nyoka kwenye pengo. That, sauti nzuri is a good voice, or maneno mazuri, matamu yanamtoa nyoka kwenye pengo. So I think if you can use good words to remove, to lure the snake out of the hole, surely, with good discussions and good dialogue, we can find common ground. I'm a great believer in dialogue,
You know why? Sorry.
Go ahead.
You know why I say this? I give this example all the time because it lends itself to that thinking. I don't know of any Tanzanian company or originated in Tanzania that has a foothold in Kenya and that has a big foothold, so to speak. Same with Uganda. If I go to Ethiopia, yet Kenya has entities that are nestled, grown in Kenya, that have footholds in these countries, right up to DRC. Now, you see, I'm asking the question again because that narrative that people have regarding the unfair advantage is given credence when you see such realities. But more importantly, as you say, it is how we speak about and to such realities and what it is that our neighbors will perceive from those conversations. From what you've understood, now I'm talking to you as a businessman, not as a politician. Are business people across our borders of the same mind to want to see an economic bloc such as the one that we're talking about?
There's a lot of truth in what you're saying. And let me give you two examples. One of the largest Tanzanian companies is the Azam Group,
yes,
the Bakhresa Group.
Yes.
And they've tried very hard to enter the Kenyan market. And all sorts of roadblocks have been put for them across in every single direction, which clearly shows protective tendencies on the Kenyan side. But then I'll also give you another example. My friend David Langat went and bought tea farms in Iringa, Tanzania. And within 9 months, TRA was on his back. He hadn't even started making money. TRA was all over him.
TRA is their KRA.
Is the equivalent of KRA. And in no time at all, he just gave up. Now, clearly, David investing in Tanzania was good for Tanzania. Clearly, Azam coming into the Kenyan market was good for the Kenyan consumer. Let's give the local producers some competition here. It was good for Kenyan traders. It was good for Kenyan employment. So you find that we're going back to what I'm saying, parochial interests that don't serve either country well. We need to remove these barriers.
What is the role of the East
now?
African
Look at. I'm sorry, Eric. Look at the recent tiff between Kenya and Tanzania on the gas imports. Okay, you have a Tanzanian who wants to come and set up an LPG plant in Mombasa, Rasto Maziz. But he has been fought left, right, and center by local people. Now, from the business point of view, it means one more player in the market.
Yep.
Yes.
But the people fighting him are fighting to protect their own business interests. Now, who do I sympathize with? Do I sympathize with the Kenyan traders who want to block him? Or do I sympathize with the Tanzanian who wants to enter our market. Let me go back to my own example. I wanted to enter the Tanzanian market when I was trading in oil, and I found all sorts of impediments. So you see, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. We lift our restrictions, they lift their restrictions. Let's open the market in an organized way so that everybody benefits. But it cannot be one way. Okay? So when Rostom comes here and lectures our president in front of 200 traders that, this market is blocked, blah, 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 he's absolutely right. But he's also being a little disingenuous, because exactly the same thing applies in the economy.
It's the same thing.
It's the same thing.
So what is the place?
So this is what I'm saying. We need an assembly that becomes more proactive in reducing these barriers, because it is in our national interest, all of us. I remember a speech by Nyerere, which was he says, the Europeans, the British with all their arrogance, and the Germans with all their arrogance, and the French with all their arrogance who ruled the world, decided that to put their petty national interests and come together as Europeans. Na sisi wa Tanzania tunarudi kwa ukabila. Okay, our small petty tribes. Okay, this was Nyerere speaking back in I think the 70s or the 80s. But that's exactly what we're doing now. Instead of just tribalism, we're doing it at a national level. Come on, man. We have more in common and more to our interests and our benefits by working together rather than looking at each other as competitors.
You see the frustration that you're talking about that are experienced by business people.
Yeah.
Those frustrations are there despite the fact that we've had an East African Legislative Assembly all these years. And respective governments and East African heads of state summit meeting every year, discussing these trade and non-trade tariff barriers and all these things. But it doesn't move. Why do you think it doesn't seem to move? Is it because of national leadership? Or is it because of the people who are representing the respective countries in the East African Assembly and also in the ministry forums?
Honestly, I'm not qualified to judge the performance of EALA because I haven't been there. And I haven't really monitored what they've been doing. But if you look at our national leadership over the last, let's say, 10, 15 years, unfortunately, when Magufuli was president, the situation became worse, between Kenya and Tanzania. But now with Samia Suluhu, the situation is drastically improved. The relationship between Museveni and President William Ruto is exceptionally good. So I'm confident that we're going to see an improvement in trade ties between Kenya and Uganda. So the direction is given at the presidential level, and then it goes downwards. But then also remember that the president needs input downwards going up. So it is important that these issues are discussed intelligently from a well-informed perspective, hopefully at the regional assembly, and then the sentiments transmitted upwards to the presidents, so that when the big boys and the big lady get together, they make informed decision in the interest of the country and in the interest of the region and Africa in general.
There's something else that somebody made a comment. We've seen now the deployment of the East African Military Force into DRC to go and deal with the M23 rebels. Now, we're talking about countries within East Africa all contributing troops to one member country to go and fight rebels in that country, and also to try and bring stability and peace. That's the word being used in that country. We know it's in a resource-rich region. Somebody was saying that this is twofold. One, it could cement the brotherhood of the East African community countries. And another one is it could actually create rifts because of the performance and the behavior of the individual militaries in that country. What do you say?
That's a very touchy point. One time I wrote an article saying that we have no business keeping our troops in Somalia. And I think 10, 15 different people from the security team were all over me, okay, saying that you're not being patriotic. I said, no, on the contrary, I'm very much being patriotic, because the Israelis, when they went into Lebanon as invaders and stayed there, they learned a very bitter lesson. When the Americans went to Vietnam, they learned a lesson. When the Soviets went to Afghanistan, they learned a lesson. When the Americans went into Afghanistan, they learned a lesson. So I'm not a believer that our armies should become invading armies. But our armies are there to keep the peace. And the regional security interests affect all of us. So I have no issues in sending our troops to pacify a region or to bring peace to a region. Where I have strong objections to is sending Kenyan troops abroad and keeping them there for years. So we need to focus on what exactly are we doing. It is a common, security is a common concern. We've seen terrorist organizations mushrooming. We've seen Al-Shabaab affecting us here in Uganda, in Tanzania, even in Mozambique. And it's a common subject. It's a common concern, and it must be addressed on a common platform. But I'm very clear on one thing. If I see our army becoming an invading army somewhere, my friend, there's no question where my position will be on that. Get our boys back. Kenyan troops have been in Somalia for how many years? More than 10 years now.
Yep.
Have we really kept the peace in that country? So it begs the question, what are we doing there? Why should our boys be dying in Somalia?
What role do you see the East African Legislative Assembly playing in lifting the status of the continent, and whatever small part? When we saw the inclusion of DR Congo in the East Africa community, there were jitters that were felt on the other side of the pond, because, all right, here we have, million man-strong regional community. But then there was also jubilation on this side, because finally you have, a strong hand when it comes to dealing matters of trade. The conversation always has been, when will Africa contribute to the economic status of the globe? How do you feel the Assembly will play a role here, especially now with these numbers that the community will control?
If you look at Africa's contribution to global trade, we're only at 3%. So we have a long way to go. Only 3%. But these type of regional assemblies are very important, because we can then articulate and have joint positions, which sometimes as individual nations we can be arm-twisted. Look at the European Union's position on the Uganda-Tanzania pipeline. I mean, I've never heard of anything more hypocritical than that. Europe exports its oil and exports its gas through pipelines. They don't send them by plane. No. Okay? Because they make money out of these things. Now here's Uganda, a poor country, finally hitting the jackpot. And then you come and tell us, oh, you're not allowed to put a pipeline. What sort of nonsense is this? Now, we need to speak as a community on such issues, not as Uganda defending itself. The whole region should say, no way. This is in our national interest. Because hopefully in a few years' time, we will also be building our pipeline from northern Kenya to Lamu. So are they going to come and tell us the same thing?
Yeah. They will.
Yes.
They will.
So we need to take a common position on some issues.
They've told us about the coal plant in Lamu.
Now you're bringing a very different subject here, okay? And you're right. You see, they came very hard on us on the coal issue, that we are contributing to global warming and all that. Let us see now how Europe is going to react to the Ukraine situation, and I can guarantee you that you'll see more coal plants coming up all over Europe now.
Yep.
They're already firing up that particular industry.
Yes.
Simply because the gas from Russia
is stopping.
Precisely.
Yes.
So it isn't as though if we had a coal plant, what percentage of, should we say, the degradation of our atmosphere, would we be contributing to the global industrial West contribution? Of what percentage would it be?
Completely negligible.
Precisely.
Okay? Because you see, today in Europe, Germany is putting up new coal plants.
Yes, they are.
Turkey is putting up coal plants. Even Dubai is putting up a 3,000 megawatt coal plant.
Mm-hmm.
When we were discussing that issue, my biggest concern, it is the greatest danger that Kenya is facing today is our youth unemployment. Okay? And if that was one way it could have contributed to lowering the cost of power substantially and creating more employment, that's where we should have looked at first. But like you said, that's a subject for another day.
It is.
It is.
It's a very controversial issue. But I'm coming back to what I'm saying. Uganda should not be defending itself alone. It is the East African community that should be standing up collectively and saying, no, this is fine. And on a lot of other issues. Because you see, Kenya on its own can be arm-twisted. Let's say we take positions at the UN, which the Americans or the Europeans don't like. It's easy to arm-twist a single country. But when you go there as a block of 10 countries and say, no, this is what the community is saying, can they really arm-twist 10 countries at the same time?
It's difficult.
Hard job.
That's why we need regional integration and regional cooperation.
Indeed. So, SULEIMAN, as you wait for the vote on Thursday, your job is now to campaign among members of parliament?
Yes.
All 500 of them?
Yes. And we are aggressively doing that and talking to everybody who will listen. And I must say thank you that you've actually given me this opportunity. Maybe I hope some of them are listening to this conversation and saying,
watching.
maybe this guy has a few things in his head.
Yeah.
Alternatively, maybe this could be say, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Wachana nayo, chagua mtu mwingine.
We wish you all the best.
Thank you.
All the best.